Marcus Thompson's hands trembled as the cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Community Food Bank cast harsh shadows across his face, while 3 police officers surrounded him, their radios crackling with static. Behind them, 7-year-old Keisha Williams pressed her face against her mother's worn coat, her wide eyes filled with confusion and terror. "Mama, why are they taking Mr. Marcus away?" she whispered, her small voice barely audible above the commotion. "He was just giving us food." The scene had erupted into chaos just 20 minutes earlier. Marcus, a 42-year-old construction worker who had volunteered at the food bank every Saturday for 3 years, had been helping families load their weekly groceries into their cars. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of fresh bread from the nearby bakery. Children's laughter had filled the parking lot as families gathered their provisions, grateful for the assistance that would help them stretch their budgets through another week. It was then that Sharon Whitman arrived, a 55-year-old real estate agent with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer sunglasses. She drove her pristine white BMW into the lot with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Sharon had recently moved to the neighborhood after her divorce settlement, and she had made it clear to anyone who would listen that she considered herself the unofficial guardian of community standards. Marcus had been loading a box of canned goods into the Williams family's dented Honda Civic when Sharon approached. LaShonda Williams, a single mother of 3 who worked 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet, was carefully organizing the food items in her trunk while her children waited patiently beside her. "Excuse me." Sharon's voice cut through the peaceful morning air like a blade. "What exactly is going on here?" Marcus looked up from the box he was carrying, his weathered hands still gripping the cardboard edges. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm just helping families load their groceries. Are you here to pick up food as well?" Sharon's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene. Her gaze lingered on LaShonda's children, then shifted to the modest car, before settling on the generous portions of food being loaded. "This seems like an awful lot of food for one family. Are you sure this is all allocated properly?" LaShonda stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tension building in the air. "I have my paperwork right here. We qualified for the Family Assistance Program. Everything is documented." "I wasn't asking you," Sharon snapped, her attention still fixed on Marcus. "I was asking him. You're giving away food that's meant for people who actually live in this neighborhood. I've been watching, and I don't think this distribution is being handled fairly." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had encountered this type of suspicion before. The assumption that his kindness must have some ulterior motive, that his presence in the neighborhood somehow didn't belong. "Ma'am, I'm a volunteer here. I've been helping distribute food for 3 years. Everyone receives what they're entitled to based on family size and need." "Show me your identification," Sharon demanded, pulling out her smartphone. "I want to see some proof that you're actually authorized to be handling these donations." The morning air grew thick with tension. Other families had begun to notice the confrontation, their conversations falling to whispers as they watched the scene unfold. Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his volunteer identification card, a laminated badge with his photo and the food bank's logo. Sharon barely glanced at the card before shaking her head dismissively. "Anyone can fake one of these. I want to speak to someone in charge. This whole operation looks suspicious to me." Margaret Chen, the food bank's director, emerged from the building at that moment, her arms full of clipboards and her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had been running the facility for over a decade, and she immediately recognized the tension in the parking lot. "Is there a problem here?" Margaret asked, her voice calm but alert. Yes, there certainly is, Sharon replied, her voice rising. This man is taking food that should be going to local families and giving it to people who probably don't even qualify. I've been watching him load box after box into that car, and it's way more than any family should receive. Margaret glanced at her clipboard, then at LaShonda. Mrs. Williams is registered for our Family Assistance Program. She has 3 children and qualifies for our largest distribution package. Everything is completely legitimate. I don't believe that for a second, Sharon shot back. And even if it is, this man was acting suspiciously. I saw him looking around nervously, checking to make sure no one was watching. That's the behavior of someone who knows they're doing something wrong. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Ma'am, I was simply being careful with the boxes. Some of them contain fragile items like eggs and bread. I always check to make sure I'm handling donations properly. Don't lie to me. Sharon's voice became shrill. I know what I saw. You were sneaking food to this family, probably taking some for yourself too. This is theft, plain and simple. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. LaShonda's children huddled closer to their mother, sensing the hostility radiating from the confrontation. Other volunteers had stopped their work to watch, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Whitman, Margaret intervened, stepping between Sharon and Marcus. I can assure you that Marcus is one of our most dedicated volunteers. He has never taken anything inappropriately, and he follows all our protocols to the letter. Then you're either lying or incompetent, Sharon replied, her face flushed with anger. I'm calling the police. This is a crime scene, and I'm not going to stand by while theft happens in broad daylight in my neighborhood. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice loud enough for everyone in the parking lot to hear. Yes, I need police at the Riverside Community Food Bank immediately. There's a black man here stealing food donations, and I have witnesses. He's been taking large quantities of food and distributing it inappropriately. I think he might be running some kind of scam. The words "black man" seemed to echo across the parking lot, carrying with them decades of loaded implications and stereotypes. Marcus felt the familiar weight of being reduced to his race, of having his character judged not by his 3 years of selfless service, but by the color of his skin and someone's prejudiced assumptions. I'm going to wait right here until the police arrive, Sharon announced, crossing her arms and positioning herself between Marcus and the exit. I'm not letting anyone leave this scene. Margaret tried once more to defuse the situation. Mrs. Whitman, please reconsider. This is completely unnecessary. I can show you all our documentation, our volunteer records, our distribution logs. Everything Marcus has done today is completely above board. Save it, Sharon replied coldly. I know what I saw, and I'm not backing down. This man was stealing, and now he's going to face the consequences. The next 15 minutes passed in excruciating slow motion. Other families began to leave, not wanting to be caught up in the confrontation. Some volunteers tried to continue their work, but the tension made normal operations impossible. Marcus stood quietly by the Williams family's car, his volunteer badge clearly visible on his chest, while Sharon maintained her vigil nearby, occasionally speaking into her phone to provide updates to the dispatcher. LaShonda tried to comfort her children, who were becoming increasingly upset by the hostility and confusion. It's okay, babies, she whispered, stroking Keisha's hair. Mr. Marcus didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people just get confused. When the police cars arrived, their red and blue lights immediately transformed the peaceful community gathering into something resembling a crime scene. 3 officers emerged from their vehicles, their hands resting casually on their utility belts as they approached the group. Officer Daniel Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran of the force, took the lead. "We received a report of theft in progress. Who called this in?" Sharon stepped forward eagerly. "I did. This man," she pointed directly at Marcus, "has been stealing food donations and giving them to people who don't qualify. I witnessed the entire thing. He was acting suspiciously, looking around to make sure no one was watching, and then loading excessive amounts of food into that car." Officer Rodriguez looked at Marcus, then at Margaret, then at the family standing beside the Honda Civic. "Sir, what's your involvement here?" "I'm a volunteer," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I've been helping distribute food to families every Saturday for 3 years. Everything I've done today is completely legitimate and documented." "That's a lie," Sharon interjected. "I've been watching him for 20 minutes, and his behavior was clearly suspicious. He was stealing, officer. I'm absolutely certain of it." Margaret stepped forward with her clipboard. "Officer, I'm the director of this food bank. Marcus Thompson is one of our most trusted volunteers. The Williams family is registered in our system and qualified for everything they receive today. I have all the documentation right here." Officer Rodriguez examined the paperwork, but Sharon's voice grew more insistent. "That could all be fabricated. I know what I saw. This man was acting guilty, and I'm not the only witness. Other people saw it too." She gestured toward the parking lot, but most of the other families had already left, and the remaining volunteers looked uncomfortable and uncertain. The officer's presence had created an atmosphere of suspicion that hadn't existed just an hour earlier. "Officer," LaShonda spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Marcus has been helping my family and others for years. He's never done anything wrong. We have all our paperwork. We qualify for this assistance." Sharon whirled around to face her. "No one asked for your opinion. You're probably in on this scam too. I bet none of you actually live in this neighborhood." The racial undertones of Sharon's accusations were becoming impossible to ignore. Officer Rodriguez glanced at his partners, clearly recognizing the delicate nature of the situation. However, the insistence of the complaint and the need to investigate thoroughly meant they had to take the allegations seriously. "Sir, I'm going to need to search your vehicle and ask you some questions," Officer Rodriguez said to Marcus. "This is just procedure. We need to investigate all reported crimes." Marcus nodded, though his heart was pounding. "Of course, officer. I have nothing to hide." The search of Marcus's pickup truck revealed nothing but his work tools, a thermos of coffee, and his lunch bag. The officers found no stolen food, no evidence of any wrongdoing. However, Sharon remained adamant in her accusations. "He probably already passed off the stolen goods," she insisted. "Or maybe he's working with accomplices. This whole operation looks fishy to me." Officer Rodriguez was growing frustrated with Sharon's persistence, but department policy required them to take all theft allegations seriously, especially when the complainant was so insistent. "Ma'am, we've searched his vehicle and found nothing. The food bank director has provided documentation showing everything was legitimate." "Then they're all in on it together," Sharon replied without hesitation. "I want this man arrested. I saw him stealing, and I'm not backing down from my statement." The situation reached a breaking point when Sharon pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling my lawyer and the news media. This is exactly the kind of fraud that's destroying our community. People are taking advantage of charitable organizations, and it has to stop." Faced with a persistent complainant threatening media attention and potential legal action, the officers made a decision that would haunt everyone present. Despite the lack of evidence, despite Margaret's documentation, despite the obvious legitimacy of the food distribution, they decided to err on the side of caution. "Sir, I'm going to have to place you under arrest, pending further investigation," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The handcuffs clicked into place as Keisha Williams began to cry. Her sobs echoed across the parking lot, mixing with the static from police radios and the distant sound of traffic. LaShonda wrapped her arms around her children, her own eyes filling with tears as she watched a man who had shown her family nothing but kindness being treated like a criminal. "This is wrong," Margaret said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Marcus has done nothing but help people. This is completely unjust." Sharon, however, looked satisfied. Justice is finally being served. Maybe now people will think twice before taking advantage of community resources. As Marcus was led to the police car, he turned back toward the Williams family. "It's going to be okay," he called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Take care of your children. This will all get sorted out." The drive to the police station passed in a blur of humiliation and disbelief. Marcus had never been arrested before, had never even received a speeding ticket. The processing was clinical and dehumanizing: fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings inventoried and stored. He was placed in a holding cell to await formal booking and the possibility of bail. Meanwhile, news of the arrest spread quickly through the community. Margaret Chen immediately called the food bank's board of directors, then contacted the local news media to provide their side of the story. LaShonda Williams, despite her own struggles, felt compelled to speak out about the injustice she had witnessed. By evening, the story had gained traction on social media. A video, taken by one of the volunteers, showed Sharon making her accusations and Marcus being arrested while children watched in horror. The hashtag #JusticeForMarcus began trending locally, then regionally, then nationally. Dr. Amelia Washington, a sociology professor at the nearby university, saw the video and immediately recognized the broader implications. She had been studying food insecurity and racial bias in community services for years, and this incident represented a perfect storm of prejudice and injustice. "This is exactly what we've been documenting," she told her research assistant that evening. "The criminalization of Black bodies, even when they're performing acts of service and charity. This man was literally feeding hungry children, and he's been arrested for it." The story reached national attention by Sunday morning. Cable news programs picked up the narrative. Legal experts weighed in on the improper arrest, and civil rights organizations began mobilizing. The Riverside Community Food Bank, which had operated quietly for decades, suddenly found itself at the center of a national conversation about race, justice, and community service. Marcus spent Saturday night in jail, sharing a cell with two other men who had been arrested on minor charges. The concrete was cold, the fluorescent lights never dimmed, and the sounds of the facility created a constant backdrop of institutional noise. He tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to Keisha's terrified face and LaShonda's tears. Sunday morning brought an unexpected development. Margaret Chen arrived at the police station with a lawyer and something that would change everything: security camera footage from the food bank's exterior cameras. "We reviewed all the footage from yesterday morning," Margaret explained to Detective Sarah Murphy, who had been assigned to investigate the case. "The cameras clearly show everything that happened. Marcus followed every protocol perfectly. He was simply doing his job as a volunteer. The security footage was damning in its clarity. It showed Marcus carefully checking his clipboard before approaching the Williams family's car. It showed him following the exact procedures he had been trained to use. It showed Sharon watching from her car for several minutes before approaching, her face clearly displaying hostility before she even spoke to anyone. Most importantly, it showed Marcus and LaShonda discussing the food distribution, with LaShonda showing him her documentation. The footage captured their friendly interaction, the children's excitement about the groceries, and Marcus's patient, professional demeanor throughout the entire process. Detective Murphy reviewed the footage twice, then called the district attorney's office. The case against Marcus Thompson fell apart within hours. Not only was there no evidence of theft, but the security footage provided clear proof that Sharon Whitman's accusations were completely false. Marcus was released Sunday afternoon, but the damage had been done. His arrest had been broadcast on social media. His reputation had been questioned, and his community had witnessed him being treated like a criminal for the act of feeding hungry children. The real turning point came Monday morning when Dr. Washington organized a press conference at the food bank. Marcus stood beside Margaret Chen, LaShonda Williams, and several other community members as they addressed a crowd of reporters and supporters. This incident represents more than just a false accusation, Dr. Washington explained to the assembled media. It represents a pattern of racial bias that criminalizes black men even when they're performing acts of service. Marcus Thompson has volunteered hundreds of hours to help feed hungry families, and he was arrested for it because one woman couldn't believe that a black man would help people without ulterior motives. LaShonda Williams stepped forward to the microphone, her 3 children standing beside her. Mr. Marcus has been helping my family for 2 years. He's helped us load groceries. He's given my children books. He's even helped me change a flat tire in this parking lot. He's never asked for anything in return. He's just a good man who cares about people. Keisha Williams, still shy from the previous day's trauma, whispered something to her mother. LaShonda smiled and lifted her daughter closer to the microphone. My little girl wants to say something. Keisha's small voice carried across the parking lot with startling clarity. Mr. Marcus gives us food when we're hungry. He didn't steal anything. He's nice to us. Why did they take him away? The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes adults make terrible decisions based on fear and prejudice? How do you tell a child that kindness can be misinterpreted as criminality when it comes from someone who looks different? The press conference was broadcast nationally, and the story exploded across social media platforms. Justice for Marcus became a rallying cry for advocates of racial justice and community service. Food banks across the country began sharing their own stories of volunteers who had faced similar suspicions and accusations. Sharon Whitman, meanwhile, had gone into hiding. Her real estate business phone rang constantly with angry callers. Her social media accounts were flooded with criticism, and local businesses began refusing to serve her. The community that she had claimed to protect was rejecting her completely. By Tuesday, the district attorney's office announced that they were considering pressing charges against Sharon for filing a false police report. The announcement came during a press conference where District Attorney Robert Kim addressed the broader implications of the case. Filing a false police report is a serious crime, but this case represents something even more serious. Kim explained, when false accusations are motivated by racial bias, they cause harm not just to the individual wrongly accused, but to our entire community's trust in the justice system. The investigation into Sharon's actions revealed a pattern of complaints and accusations against Black and Latino residents in her neighborhood. She had called police on children playing in parks, had complained about families gathering for barbecues, and had consistently questioned the presence of people of color in community spaces. Wednesday brought another significant development. The National Association of Food Banks announced that they were establishing the Marcus Thompson Community Service Award, to be given annually to volunteers who exemplify dedication to fighting hunger and serving others without regard to race, ethnicity, or economic status. Marcus represents the best of America, said NAFB President Jennifer Rodriguez during the announcement. He saw hungry children and fed them. He saw families in need and helped them. He asked for nothing in return, except the satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. That's the spirit we want to celebrate and encourage. The Williams family had become unwitting symbols of the families that food banks serve nationwide. LaShonda appeared on several television programs, eloquently explaining the challenges of food insecurity and the importance of community support systems. "People think we're looking for handouts," she explained during one interview. "But we're working people who are just trying to make ends meet. The food bank doesn't just provide groceries. It provides dignity and hope. It shows us that our community cares about us and our children." Thursday marked exactly 1 week since Marcus's arrest, and the Riverside Community Food Bank organized a community solidarity event. Hundreds of people gathered in the parking lot where the incident had occurred, bringing donations and showing support for Marcus and the food bank's mission. Local restaurants donated prepared meals, grocery stores contributed fresh produce, and families from across the city brought canned goods and non-perishable items. The event raised more food donations in one day than the food bank typically received in a month. Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice carrying across the parking lot through a borrowed sound system. "A week ago, I was arrested in this same spot for doing what I believed was right, helping hungry children and families. Today, I'm standing here surrounded by hundreds of people who believe in the same thing I believe in, that we're all responsible for taking care of each other." He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd that had gathered to support him and the food bank's mission. "What happened to me was wrong, but what's happening now is right. This is what community looks like. This is what justice looks like. This is what love looks like." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus raised his hand to continue. "I want to thank everyone who spoke up for me, everyone who shared the truth about what happened, and everyone who's here today to support families in need. But most of all, I want to thank the Williams family for their courage in standing up and telling the truth, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet." LaShonda Williams stepped forward, her children beside her, and embraced Marcus as the crowd cheered. It was a moment of healing and reconciliation that seemed to represent something larger than the individual trauma they had all experienced. Friday brought the final piece of justice that many had been waiting for. The district attorney's office announced that Sharon Whitman would be charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that could result in fines and community service. More significantly, she was being sued by Marcus Thompson for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil lawsuit, filed by a team of pro bono attorneys, sought not just financial compensation, but also a public apology and a commitment from Sharon to participate in racial bias education programs. The legal action sent a clear message that false accusations motivated by racial prejudice would not be tolerated. Sharon's attorney issued a brief statement. "My client maintains that she was acting in good faith based on what she believed she observed. However, in light of the evidence that has emerged, she recognizes that her perceptions were incorrect and that her actions caused significant harm to innocent people." The statement was widely criticized as inadequate, but it represented the first acknowledgement from Sharon's side that her accusations had been wrong. Legal experts predicted that the civil lawsuit would likely result in a substantial settlement and a more comprehensive apology. Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after his arrest, Marcus returned to his volunteer duties at the Riverside Community Food Bank. The parking lot that had been the scene of his humiliation was now filled with new volunteers, many of whom had been inspired by his story to get involved in community service. Margaret Chen had to turn away volunteers because so many people had signed up to help. "We've gone from having a dozen regular volunteers to having over 100 people wanting to help," she explained to a reporter. "That's the silver lining in all of this. Marcus's story has inspired people to get involved in ways we never could have imagined." The Williams family arrived for their regular Saturday grocery pickup, but this time they were accompanied by several other families who had been hesitant to use the food bank's services before. LaShonda had become an informal ambassador, helping other families navigate the system and overcome the stigma that sometimes surrounds accepting assistance. "Mr. Marcus showed us that asking for help isn't shameful," explained Maria Santos, a single mother who had recently lost her job. "He treated everyone with dignity and respect. If he believes in this program, then I believe in it too." The ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. Food banks across the country reported increases in volunteers and donations. Anti-bias training programs saw increased enrollment. Community organizations began implementing new protocols to protect volunteers and clients from discriminatory treatment. Dr. Washington's research team had been documenting the entire sequence of events, and their preliminary findings were already being cited in academic papers and policy discussions. This case study demonstrates both the persistence of racial bias in community settings and the power of collective action to create change, she wrote in her initial report. 3 months later, the Riverside Community Food Bank held its annual Volunteer Appreciation Dinner. Marcus Thompson was presented with a special recognition award, not just for his years of service, but for his grace and dignity in the face of injustice. In his acceptance speech, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all to that moment. 3 months ago, I thought my volunteer work was just about loading boxes and organizing food drives. I learned that it's about much more than that. It's about building a community where everyone belongs, where everyone is valued, and where everyone has enough to eat. He looked out at the audience, which included dozens of new volunteers, several of the families he had helped over the years, and Margaret Chen, who had become more than just a director, but a true advocate for justice. "What happened to me was painful, but what came after was beautiful. We turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change." LaShonda Williams stood up from her table and began to applaud, her 3 children joining her. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, celebrating not just Marcus, but the community they had all helped to build. Keisha Williams, now 8 years old and more confident than she had been that traumatic Saturday morning, called out across the room, "Thank you, Mr. Marcus, for taking care of us." Her words echoed what everyone in the room was thinking. In a world where kindness is sometimes met with suspicion, where service can be criminalized, and where racial bias continues to divide communities, Marcus Thompson had shown them all what it meant to persist in doing good. The Riverside Community Food Bank continued its work, now stronger and more supported than ever before. Sharon Whitman quietly moved away from the neighborhood, but not before completing court-ordered community service at a different food bank, where she began to understand the reality of food insecurity and the importance of the work she had tried to undermine. Marcus Thompson continued to volunteer every Saturday, but now he was joined by dozens of others who had been inspired by his example, Children who had been afraid that day in the parking lot now ran to greet him when their families arrived for assistance. New volunteers sought his guidance and mentorship. Community leaders consulted him on issues of food security and racial justice. The story that began with false accusations and an unjust arrest had transformed into something larger and more meaningful. It became a testament to the power of truth, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the possibility of creating positive change, even in the face of prejudice and injustice. Years later, when people asked Marcus about that Saturday morning that changed everything, he would always say the same thing. "I learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And I learned that when good people come together, they can overcome anything." The Marcus Thompson Community Service Award continued to be presented annually, honoring volunteers across the country who embodied his spirit of service and resilience. Each recipient received not just recognition, but also the knowledge that their work was part of a larger movement toward justice, equality, and community care. The Riverside Community Food Bank parking lot, once the scene of humiliation and injustice, had become a symbol of hope and healing. Families continued to receive assistance with dignity and respect. Volunteers continued to serve with dedication and purpose. And children like Keisha Williams continued to learn that their community would take care of them, no matter what challenges they faced. In the end, Marcus Thompson's story became more than just an account of one man's experience with false accusations and racial bias. It became a reminder that individual acts of courage and kindness can inspire collective action, that truth will ultimately prevail over prejudice, and that communities have the power to heal themselves when they choose justice over judgment, understanding over suspicion, and love over fear.